This is the new Tamron 17-70 f2.8 lens for Sony APS-C cameras, and I really wanted it to be the perfect lens for Sony crop shooters. Before we dive into the examples, tests, and reasons why this lens disappointed me a little bit, do me a favor, head down to the comment section, let me know what the biggest factor is that you look for when you're looking at new lenses and why. Price, size, features, image quality, go into as much detail as you want because that information is really going to help me out to make more valuable lens reviews in the future. Okay, let's talk about what the Tamron 17-70 has to offer. 17 to 70 millimeters on APS-C is a fantastic all-around range, making this quite capable for someone who maybe only wants to carry around one lens at a time. The full frame field of view equivalent of that would be 25.5 to 105 millimeters. The wide end is enough for some vlogging depending on your style as well as landscape shots, and on the long end you're covered for portraits and a little bit into that telephoto range. This lens gives you just a little bit more reach than your typical 16 to 50 or 18 to 55 kit lens. It also has a constant f2.8 aperture, which can be an awesome feature on APS-C where it's a little bit tougher to get shallow depth of field, as well as you have to be a little more careful about your low light situations. It has weather sealing, it's reasonably light at 525 grams or 1.2 pounds, it's got a 67 millimeter filter thread, it's 119 millimeters or 4.7 inches long, which I would classify as kind of a medium-sized lens, which I thought it was a great combination with my a6600. There are two things that really make this lens stand out though. It has Tamron's vibration compensation, which is just their version of in-lens stabilization, which is going to be so handy because in Sony's APS-C lineup, a lot of the cameras don't have in-body stabilization. Basically just the 6500 and 6600 and the rest don't have it. This is less of a problem for Sony's full-frame lineup because almost all the cameras have in-body stabilization. And the other exciting thing is that it's only $800, which makes this lens on paper really reasonable for what it is. So what is the problem, Dunna? Why didn't you title this video "The Lens That Every Sony APS-C Shooter Needs to Buy"? Tamron has been doing a fantastic job of making affordable versions of staple lenses for Sony cameras, and so of course I had high hopes for this one too. But there are actually a lot of other options in this kind of same category that you have to consider. The most obvious one is the Sony 16 to 55 f2.8 G lens that this lens is almost exactly aimed at replacing. There were two main issues with that lens. First of all, it had no stabilization, which made it a lot less tempting for the folks who didn't have the in-body stabilization. And second, that lens is $1,400. The image quality is fantastic, but that's still a lot of money. So the question when comparing those two is, does the Tamron stand up in image quality? More on that later. The other option that I would immediately compare this to is the Sony 18 to 105 f4G lens. You've got a little bit more reach than the Tamron, you've still got stabilization, and you've got the power zoom, which is kind of a cool feature. That lens was my ultimate if I could only have one Sony APS-C lens for a long time, and I was excited to see if the Tamron could take its place. The 18 to 105 definitely wasn't the sharpest lens, and the f4 could be a little bit limiting in low light situations, but it was a solid all-arounder and it was super versatile. If the Tamron could up the quality a little bit and give me the f2.8 without too much extra cost, we would be laughing. And just because I know somebody's going to mention it in the comments, there are other options in this category as well. The 18 to 35 f3.5 to 5.6. Not a huge fan of variable aperture, so I set that one aside. There's the 16 to 50 kit lens with the same variable aperture that's super cheap. And then there's the Zeiss 16 to 70 f4, which is a little bit more expensive at $1,000. But here's the real big problem that I found with this whole thing. At this price point, with those features, I really needed the Tamron to deliver on image quality. There were a couple of hangups. My experience with this lens is that at the wide end, it looks pretty good. When I was shooting at 17 millimeters, I had nice sharpness, good colors, just overall decent quality. As I pushed up to 35 millimeters, things are still looking good, so staying hopeful. But then once I pushed past about 50 millimeters, things started to fall apart a little bit. I wouldn't say it was bad necessarily, but it definitely didn't wow me either, even for the price. In fact, I was so surprised at my own disappointment that I decided to compare it against the 28 to 75, their full frame kind of equivalent. I put them both on the a6600 and compared them at about 56 millimeters, and the 28 to 75 looked way better. But then we come back to the two advantages that this lens has over some of the other ones in the category: f2.8 aperture and stabilization. The wonderful folks over at McBain Camera here in Edmonton lent me an A6100 so I could do some tests with that stabilization. I did a bit of a walking vlogging test and I found that that stabilization was a little bit helpful, pretty much on par with what I expect from Sony APS-C cameras at this point. But where you really see the difference is when I pushed it out to 70mm and just did kind of a handheld shot. In these kinds of shots, the vibration correction makes a huge difference, and even though I noticed it being a little bit jerky here and there, it is still so much better than my over-caffeinated hands. Autofocus I had absolutely no issue with, it performed as well as any of my other native E-mount glass. So while this lens isn't the perfect lens that I had hoped it would be, and I am a little bit disappointed at those quality issues on the long end, it's still got a lot going for it. This is the only Sony E-mount APS-C mid-range zoom that has both f2.8 aperture and image stabilization. Other lenses that we talked about today have one or the other, but this is the only one that checks both of those boxes. And I think that that's going to be a really important factor for a lot of people making a decision about a lens. So if you were in the market for a mid-range zoom like this and you were considering the Tamron, here's what I'd suggest. First of all, consider how important that f2.8 aperture is to you. Because if you're okay with an f4 aperture, you could take a look at the 18-105, you could get a little bit of extra range and save about $150 that you could start putting towards prime lenses. If image quality is the absolute most important thing and you can live without the image stabilization, this is when you might want to start looking into that Sony 16-55 f2.8. Though I will admit that that's a bit of a tough call to make since the problems in the Tamron don't happen until you've already gone past the range of the Sony. So when you look at it, this lens, even with its disappointments, does really fill a gap in the market, and it does it at a reasonably affordable price. I really wish that Tamron had just knocked it out of the park with the image quality, and then it would be so much easier to just tell everybody to get this lens, but that's the way these things go, so you're gonna have to make sure that you do your due diligence, take a look at what's out there, and make a decision based on your specific needs and what's important to you when you're looking for a lens. Leave a comment below and let me know which one you'd choose between the Tamron, the Sony 16-55, or the Sony 18-105. And on your way down there, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, hit that bell notification so you don't miss out on future reviews and tutorials. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. So, while I was filming this video, I made up this B-roll sequence and I didn't really feel like it fit in the video, but it was a lot of fun to make. So if you made it this far, here it is.